Next question is from Granny K. Are there any thoughts you have on open sourcing Resonite either in parts or fully? Oh, yes, actually. It's actually one of the things I would like to do in not like the immediate future, well, soonish, is start open sourcing pieces of Resonite. So if we think about open sourcing Resonite in full, that one's a lot more complicated because we use like code that's ported from third-party code that we don't necessarily have a license to open source. We use code that's also used from other things that like we have license to include in the code, but not necessarily license to relicense it. There's stuff like where open sourcing certain parts might potentially open up some security kind of issues because there's like certain mechanisms like say stuff with bun evasion. We specifically don't talk about how bun evasion works, and part of it like is on the cloud infrastructure where the code is not accessible to people. You cannot decompile it from the client, and if people knew, or the more people knew how that works, that makes it easier for them to get around it. So like open sourcing that can cause harm. So there's a lot of kind of like things like that. There's also other part of it is in order to open source it, that usually implies that people will be able to start submitting pull requests because they want to submit improvements. We need to be able to handle those, both like having the bandwidth for it and having some sort of structure in place where we are like these are our coding practices. This is what we accept. This is what we don't accept. Because we need to ensure that is for our version of it, we want to maintain certain quality of the code, and we want to maintain certain philosophy of the code. There's like things like one of the strong principles for Resonite is we always make sure when possible everything stays synchronized. But there's like you could just implement things in a way that doesn't follow that principle, but it's something we would be very unlikely to accept. But that's something that needs to be defined. We need to say this is how you need to write things. So it kind of adds additional kind of overhead and complexity that we need to do to open source things. And even in general, like we might have like we do have overall goal where we want to take Resonite and we want to head like in certain direction. There's also might be things where people might fix bugs and things in a way that's not the highest quality, or that could cause other issues and other problems, so we might not accept those. So there's a lot of kind of like complexities with like open sourcing the whole thing that I don't think we are ready to handle. Like it requires a lot more work and potentially more manpower than we have right now to do that. Unless we just went like we open source it and we're not accepting anything, we just just do whatever. But I don't think that would be a good way to do it. So in order to kind of tackle this, I want us to do the open sourcing more gradually. Actually, there's one more thing. If we open source the thing fully, one consideration or concern that we have is, are we gonna be able to continue doing it as a company? Could somebody like, Meta just come in, take the code, and just kind of push us out and, destroy us like, with the like infinite resources? That's something we don't want to happen. We want to keep working on this. We want to make this our livelihood. And as a thing, we need to balance with the benefits we would get from open sourcing. So there's another kind of like thing like where it's a bit of an unknown, and there's like stuff like licenses that will help prevent that, or at least minimize the risk. But also we have to weigh those against other things, so it becomes a more kind of complicated issue. So on the flip side, doing it by pieces, I think, is much more kind of digestible, much more easier, on our bandwidth right now, while still getting a lot of the kind of benefits of that. So what I would want us to do is essentially take various subsystems, and make those open source. One of them is being, for example, the import and export system. Because I think the one's going to be like, the one's a really good candidate to open source relatively early, because it doesn't really, like, it doesn't modify the data model, like, it doesn't, like, add any types of components and things. It's just a system where, you take whatever external formats you have, and it translates them into the data model, or takes, like, stuff that's in the data model and translates it out. If we design it right, we can, make sure that it's easy to write importer and exporter modules. We can also take the existing, importer and exporter functionality and just, essentially just open source it. So people can use it both as a reference or to make their own forks, with modifications, to help, better support the content like you're making. And like, it's something we don't have to like worry super much, about long-term issues, because say if you're making a component, something that becomes part of a data model, now there's a worry because that component can be saved into the cloud. Now we have to worry, will that component keep working the same way it's working, 5 years down the line? Is this maintainable? Is this going to cause issues? And that adds a lot of overhead to those things. With an importer and exporter, we don't have to worry about that because it's not adding any new components, it's just translating stuff. So at the moment you import something, it translates it into, the Resonite data model, and the Resonite data model, we already know what's in there that we can support it. So the translation is essentially just like, one-time process. Additionally, it helps, with some of the security stuff, because say we open source stuff, it might make it much easier to make, like, rippers for content, where you can, like, steal people's, avatars and things like that, because now we have, access to all of the code. If we only open source, the importer and exporter, and there's, like, specific APIs that you interact with, we can make it, so it's not possible to invoke an exporter on something you don't own. So you cannot, just use it to, like, rip data out, and it kind of helps make things a little bit more contained. The other parts that I think we might open source is, stuff like the shaders. Those will be mostly for reference. One thing actually that I've been kind of considering, though, is also open sourcing the new procedural animation system, because it's one of those things like where I'm not really happy with it. Like, it's been kind of like, rushed, and it needs a lot more work, but also, like, I want to spend time on some like bigger features. So one of the thought I was having is, if we made this open source, we was just like, here's the code, we could start, like, accepting improvements, let the community help us, kind of polish it up some more, and improve, the platform. I don't know if that's the way we'll do. Like, actually, there's a question, to you, like, would you be willing to help us, improve things like that, so we can kind of focus on other things? Is that something you would want to do? Like, if you like this idea, let us know, because that definitely will help, like, influence the decision about that. The other part is also, like, I think is going to be great open source, is like the device drivers. So, like, if you want to support for more devices, like, more face tracking, more, haptics hardware, we can take, existing drivers we have, we open source them, again, as a reference, or so you can, see, like, this is how these things are implemented to make your own. Or maybe you want to make a fork, like, you don't like how certain part of it works, you want to modify it, run your own fork instead, share it with the community, you'll be able to do that as well. So, that's going to be another great one. It's also, like, one of those that doesn't need to add new things to the data model. So I do think, like, we're gonna be, maybe this year, hopefully this year, we'll start, like, open sourcing pieces of Resonite, because we do have a great community and people, who want to help make this platform better, and I feel that's gonna, provide, it's gonna provide a way to kind of contribute more in that regard, and also, even if you don't want to, help contribute, like, to the main platform, it's going to give you ability to better, customize some of the aspects of the platform. Say, like, you want to import, like, some super obscure format, or, one that we would not really prioritize. now you have like, easy framework to work with to add that support for that format, into Resonite. We, by open sourcing that part, we kind of give you more power, in there. And over time, like, we'd kind of do more and more bits of like, Resonite, and maybe eventually we do the whole thing, but that is, like I mentioned earlier, that is much bigger task with a lot more kind of considerations. But yeah, like, it's definitely something we'd like to do. It's gonna happen in pieces, hopefully this year. So, keep tuned, and hopefully soon-ish DM.